Vaya. Continuing with the passing away of Bhismadeva chapter, Canto 1, Chapter 9, text 13, and onward. Translation. As far as my daughter-in-law, Kunti, is concerned, upon the great General Pandu's death, she became a widow with many children, and therefore she suffered greatly. And when you were grown up, she suffered a great deal also because of your actions. Purport. The sufferings of Kunti Devi are doubly lamented. She suffered greatly because of early widowhood and to get her minor children brought up in the royal family. And when her children were grown up, she continued to suffer because of her son's actions. So, her sufferings continued. This means that she was destined to suffer by providence. And this one has to tolerate without being disturbed. It's not usual to see or hear Kunti being referred to as the daughter-in-law of Bhismadeva, but she's the daughter-in-law because Bhismadeva had 3 stepbrothers. Stepbrothers meaning they were born of a different mother, but from the same father. The same father was Santanu. Santanu, right? Yes? Yes, Santanu. And Santanu first, we discussed this yesterday, the first wife was Ganga. And he, Bhishma, was the 8th child. We discussed this yesterday. So Bhishma was born of Santanu and Ganga. Ganga left after Bhishma or Deva Vrata was trained in spiritual practices, etc. And then Santanu was without a queen. So Satyavati became his queen. Right? Then what happened? Satyavati became the mother of 2 sons, and the 2 sons passed from this world before they had children. That was a dilemma. And so Satyavati, not knowing what to do, she requested her previous son was Vyasadeva. Satyavati requested Vyasadeva to assist her in producing sons with the co-wives of one of the brothers, one of the sons of Satyavati that were still remaining. Anyway, so 3 sons were born. 3 sons were born. Dhritarashtra in sequence, elder, Dhritarashtra, Pandu, and Vidura. So those 3, those were brothers of Bhismadeva because they came from the same mother, or stepmother. And so they were brothers or stepbrothers. And Bhismadeva, as they grew up, because he was older, as the elder brother, he helped, in the absence of father, to make arrangements for marriage for his brothers, younger brothers. And one of the arrangements was for Pandu to marry Kunti. So that's his daughter-in-law. That Mahabharata detail. Daughter-in-law. But it's nice. Kunti Devi naturally had a protector. Not her father, but her father-in-law. Protecting his daughter-in-law, Kunti. And he is acknowledging the difficulty of being a mother of 5 boys, not just 5 boys, but 5 powerful boys, 5 very powerful boys. What a handful. And so when her husband died, she was advised by the sages to return from the forest or secluded life back to the royal kingdom. And by the time that happened, they had peers, the sons of Dhritarashtra, that were really envious of these other boys because the other boys were going to become king and so forth and so on, and in intrigue. So it doesn't specify what the actions of the 5 Pandavas caused her tribulation. Doesn't specify. Because they were virtuous. So how can virtuous people cause tribulation to their mother? But there was the circumstance of the intrigue against them, and so forth and so on. So she suffered, and then her sufferings continued. So the previous verse, the first of Bhishma's words to Yudhisthira, you suffered terribly. You shouldn't. Normal people would never even have been able to endure, to live in the circumstances that you were placed. But Krishna always protected you. And then the focus goes to Kunti. And she suffered greatly, and she continued after the loss of her husband. Difficult for a mother, a wife, to lose her husband, a virtuous husband, perfectly virtuous husband, with 5 sons. Then their behavior caused further suffering. So he's extending his heart in a very heart-warming way to the persons assembled there, the Pandavas, headed by Yudhisthira. And the intent is to pacify his lamentation. So we heard yesterday one very important principle in pacifying lamentation is to consider what is it that you're lamenting about? Is there a real valid reason to lament if the outcome of things have been in complete alignment with dharmic principles? And if everything's been in alignment with dharmic principles, then some misfortune, it comes as a providential arrangement, so you don't lament. A wise person doesn't lament. Oh, he's reminding Yudhisthira to be wise, because his lamentation was due to what? Seeing so many millions of persons killed for all the reasons that Arjuna didn't want to engage in the battle. He saw the consequence. For me, this happened? Horrible. It's his humility and his compassion that was prevailing. So Bhismadeva is realigning his humility and compassion with Dharma. And when Dharma has been the guiding principle of your life, there's nothing to lament. Even when misfortune comes, there's nothing to lament. And then Kunti. Now, he doesn't give the same realignment message to her, but the same applies to her. or anyone that has misfortune, if there's some course correction that's needed, you make some course correction. But if one is perfectly aligned with Dharma, there's nothing to lament. Good fortune, ill fortune. It's the neutrality position of a dharmic individual. The main thing is, the main stabilizing factor is relationship with the Supreme, because the Dharma is to make that connection. Kunti knows that. We know from the previous chapter. But this is an indication of, if you someday become an elder person, it's needed for you to pacify the hearts of someone who's feeling some intense negative emotion. Bhismadeva is giving some indication, some things that might be considered. You empathize with their difficulty. Then comes, the transcendence. Text 14. In my opinion means it's a fact. In my opinion, this is all due to inevitable time, under whose control everyone and every planet is carried, just as the clouds are carried by the wind. So there's a nice metaphor. Clouds are carried by wind. Wind doesn't generate the clouds. Wind carries the clouds, and there goes the clouds. So you can be concerned with the configuration of the clouds in the sky at any particular time. Well, it may be interesting, but it's not so substantial. So with the metaphor comes also a detachment by recognizing what's real and what's not real, no, it's not substantial or temporary. I remember a little game we played as children. We'd lean back and look at the clouds in the sky and describe what we saw, the configuration of the clouds in the sky. Sometimes there was a pussycat, and the pussycat became a dragon, and the dragon just disappeared. The cloud dissipated and became not visible anymore. But we continued playing the game because we were having a nice time. But the configuration of the clouds in the sky has no substance. The substance, the perception, this is a nice teaching of Madhvacharya in relation to the impersonal, in refutation of impersonalism. He has a 5-step procedure of how to understand their term Mithya. Mithya doesn't have an exact English equivalent. A common translation is false, but it's not exactly false. It's even more. It's more stronger. It just doesn't exist. Mithya. Anyway, he goes through this analysis that even if you think that it's something else, that means there's something else exists. You follow? Like a mirage. You think it's water, but it's not water. It means there must be water. Otherwise, it wouldn't have the concept that it's water, although it's not water. The concept of Mithya is misleading. There is substance. It's 5 steps. Anyway, back to the verse. Time, we know from Bhagavad Gita, time destroys things. Correct? Kalos me. And he's as time I am the destroyer of all things. So time destroys things. But time does other things besides destroy things. time, like the wind moves clouds in the sky, time controls everyone and every planet. And they're carried like wind carries. So it brings things into being, it transitions things that are being, and it withdraws things from being. Time is very invisible, yet very powerful force. And so who has seen time? Well, one person that we know that saw time was Lord Brahma. Lord Brahma, when Krishna manifested all the calves and cowherd boys, himself as each of the calves and each of the cowherd boys, he showed all of the energies of Narayana personified, one of which was personified time. So he saw time personified. Cartoon people have time personified, looking like an old man with a big saber over his shoulders. It's like death, right? That's the characterization of time. Father Time. He chops people. But he doesn't just chop people. He moves everything. Time, you can't see, but so providence and time can be used interchangeably. It's a providential arrangement. It was arranged by providence. Sometimes it was fated. It was simply meant to be, and therefore it happened. So time is that agent of providence. So providence, or the supreme person, supreme controller, moves things through the agency of his potency. Potencies, plural, one of those being time. Just like in the process of creation. Time is a very interesting topic, really interesting topic. Someday I was thinking, before Sataputta left this world, one of the last topics he was developing was an explanation of time. Sataputta-esque, very lofty description of time, using the Vedic model and using theoretical physics model, relative time and all those things. The laws of relativity, as Einstein taught them, and matching that with the Vedic model and Sataputta. So, but time is fascinating. It appears within the Vedas in various places. Read carefully when Ambarish Maharaj is offering prayers to Sudarshan. You'll find time mentioned, because Sudarshan destroys and time destroys. So there's a relationship between. So the Lord has potencies for the purpose of creation. Time is, along with the living entities, time is carried with the glance of Mahavishnu, because without time, you don't have creation. Without time, you don't have stuff. There's energy. Energy isn't created or destroyed, but to move the energy, you need time. Say it in reverse. Without time, matter doesn't move. Say it positively. Time moves matter. Brings things into being, moves things along, destroys things. So Bhismadeva here is saying, as far as I'm concerned, in my opinion, this is all due to the inevitable time. The misfortune of the Pandavas, the protection of the Pandavas, the fact that he's now the king, it was part of Krishna's plan. You are protected by the Brahmanas, God, and religion. It's also a time factor. This is due to inevitable kala kritam is the Sanskrit. Prabhupada has translated it. The inevitable time. Kala's time. Kritam can mean different things, depends on the context. It can mean, to do something, it's done by time, but inevitable time. Means you can't stop it. You can't, that's providence. You can't stop providence. You can't stop time. Try to stop time. Don't get old, okay? I'm going to stay young. You can't stop time. Here's Prabhupada's purport. There is control by time all over the space within the universe, as there is control by time all over the planets. All the big, gigantic planets, including the sun, are being controlled by the force of air, as the clouds are carried by the force of air. Now, it's an interesting detail, but in the 5th canto of the Bhagavatam, it describes that the planets are held in place by ropes of air. You don't see them. Who's seen a rope of air? But there's ropes of air that are connected to Dhruvaloka, because remember, Dhruva was controlling his prana, and because he was controlling his prana, the whole flow of air in the universe became disturbed, and the demigods went to Lord Vishnu saying, "How? I can't breathe." So those ropes of air are connected to Dhruvaloka because he is very powerful with regard to many things, but including the air component within the universe. And as Dhruvaloka turns, there's a wind, there's a nice Sanskrit name for the wind, that moves those ropes of air, and the planets move. That's the 5th canto Bhagavatam. So the planets are circumambulating in a clockwise direction. They're circumambulating Dhruvaloka, although in a hierarchical position or vertical position, higher or lower, but they're moving by ropes of air as Dhruvaloka is turning. And this wind, universal wind, is blowing the ropes of air. Fascinating. But so that's what it says here. All the big gigantic planets, including the sun, are being controlled by the force of air, as the clouds are carried by the force of air. Similarly, the inevitable kala, or time, controls even the action of the air. No, kala chakra. The wheel of time is turning. So I don't know the connection between this wind and the ropes of air and the movements of the kala chakra. There's some connection, but the time energy is moving that wind that's moving the ropes of air that's moving the planets. Time moves all things. That's the point. Everything, therefore, is controlled by the supreme kala, a forceful representative of the Lord within the material world. Thus, Yudhisthira should not be sorry for the inconceivable action of time. Everyone has to bear the actions and reactions of time. As long as one is within the conditions of the material world, Yudhisthira should not think that he had committed sins in his previous birth and is suffering the consequences. Even the most pious has to suffer the condition of material nature. And is this your underlining? You underlined something here. Yeah? The next line is underlined. But a pious man is faithful to the Lord, for he is guided by the bona fide Brahmana, and Vaishnava following the religious principles. That was from the 2 verses, yesterday morning verse. So, Dharma, following religious principles, guided by Vaishnavas and Brahmanas for the purpose of pleasing the Lord. So Yudhishthira is again repeating the same point as 2 verses ago, that the Yudhishthira should not lament. We should not lament. If there's a course correction needed, if one of those 3 is not in place, and the 3 are not in alignment, then we can do a course correction. But if to the degree that that's where our attention should go, not the circumstances. Material life is focus on the problem, try to sort out improving the conditions of the problem without having anything to do with what's the root of the problem. Just adjusting things. Problem solving. A wise person is not engaged like that. You may take some practical steps for things. The house is on fire. You put the fire out. But why was there a fire in the house? Or et cetera, et cetera. If you have a medical problem, okay, deal with the medical problem. But what's behind it? And what's behind that? And what's behind that? What's behind that? That's an intelligent person. That's Brahma Jigyasa. A pious man is faithful to the Lord, for he is guided by the bona fide Brahman and Vaishnava, following the religious principles. These 3 guiding principles should be the aim of life. This past weekend, I was sharing. It's a really nice experience. 100 people came that knew nothing about bhakti life. And they came because they wanted out of the 4 walls because of COVID, and they were invited to come to a gathering at a farm with cows and peacocks, and so they came. And they weren't sadhakas. They didn't know the Maha Mantra. That was like totally new. And on this final evening, there was like a gathering of people that wanted more discussion time. The first person, lady probably in her 30s, I'm guessing, or late 20s or 30s, early 30s. Her question was Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's question to Ramananda Roy. Her question was, what's the purpose of life? And I said, okay, and how to achieve it, right? Yeah, and how to achieve it. So the answer I gave was Prabhupada's very simple answer, to know yourself. And then you can unpack, what does to know yourself mean? And you pull all the strands out, and then you put it back together, and it's to know yourself. And here's another answer, which is another way of saying the same thing. It's certainly a different way of saying, but it's the same thing. These 3 things, these 3 guiding principles should be the aim of life. It's significant, isn't it? One should not be disturbed by the tricks of eternal time. Even the great controller of the universe, Brahmaji, is also under the control of that time, semicolon. Therefore, one should not grudge being thus controlled by time, despite being a true follower of religious principles. This is the why do bad things happen to good people question. It's a popular question. And it's, in one sense, it's a natural question. Or why do bad things happen to little children? Because they didn't do anything yet. Excuse me, but In a material conception of life, that there's no answers to important questions, natural questions. And society is guided by people that don't know. The educators don't know. The administrators, the brahmanas and kshatriyas and vaishyas don't know. And we're growing up in an atmosphere of ignorance, of knowing the value of life and the purpose of life and life. You know, there's songs about it, and there's Broadway shows about it, and there's complaints about it, and there's blaming about it, and shame about it, and there's, you know, all kinds of illusory energies moving around. But people don't know. And there's no solution because they don't know the purpose. Big challenge, isn't it? For Prabhupada or us as representatives to try to help. Listening to Prabhupada's lectures again and again. I have one of these little machines, about that big, and it has several thousand recorded lectures. Really fantastic. Hearing Prabhupada every day, several times during the course of the day. And big percentage, I'm going to say invariably, his speaking voice starts to rise. The tone, the intensity, about the misfortune of people who aren't properly led, and the misfortune of having leaders that are misleading. They're not qualified because they don't know, and they're leading. And the people are followed because yad yadacharati shreshtas tat tat eve torojana. It's just a principle. Some are followers, some are leaders, and if leaders don't know, blind people are being led by a blind person, they fall in the ditch. It's, you know, it's just a principle. So what to do? And the appeal Prabhupada would make is, even if you're not successful, you're I'm appealing to you. Please understand and please carry this message forward, because people are suffering due to ignorance. Please, you know, please. This is such a valuable, essential. You know, promoting ISKCON. You know, the mission of Krishna and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in disciplic succession, etc. Even if you're not successful, it's because Prabhupada wanted people to be happy, and you can't be happy if you're guided by ignorance. Can't be. Ignorance doesn't lead to happiness. So where do you get knowledge? You have to get knowledge from the right source. Otherwise, it's ignorance in the name of knowledge. And for, you know, the learned people, scholars, professors, scientists, largely, now it's not 100%, but largely, as again, it becomes more and more as Kali Yuga progresses, we know the whole story. It gets darker and darker. It's not easy. At the same time, there is an innate soul with innate knowledge that's now covered, and the process of awakening that, removing the covering and awakening that inherent knowledge is very simple, and people aren't interested because they're guided by something else. Nonetheless, receive and give. And that's the Hare Krishna movement. That's the Bhagavatam. Here it is. Given by one of the great Mahajans in his parting moments. The scene is wonderful, the message is wonderful, very relevant for our contemporary practical life. I mean, the scene is not likely to be replicated, but the messages are universal. So read Prabhupada's books, distribute Prabhupada's books, live by the teachings, and try to encourage others by your good example. Here's one additional thing I wanted to share, and I'll end. The person that organized this event, well, yesterday I spent some time with Murli Vadaka, godbrother, very thoughtful person, etc., etc. He was sharing with me his interactions with individuals who are really trying, in a concentrated way, really trying to reach the other than the Indian population in America. And they're finding it's not easy. Yet, he was very surprised to hear 100 people came who knew nothing about nothing. Like, how did it work? So I saw some of the feedback of the people who attended, and it was jubilant. One of them said, I would come to 100 of these types of events, and they had never been there before. And the comment is consistent comment from each of the 3 feedbacks that I saw. Everyone was so kind. They treated us so nicely. So, achar is stronger than prachar, is my point. Interacting amongst ourselves, not just with new people for sure, but amongst ourselves, showing by nice example. This is the conduct of a spiritual person, a spiritual individual, individuals making up a spiritual sangha or community or group. Our own behavior in our families, in our communities, and with outsiders is they said they felt so welcome, and one of them remarked, all of us, I found it remarkable that persons were sharing very personal things openly in that forum because they felt safe. That way they could get at least some direction, not maybe a solution, but some direction in how to deal with things they're struggling with. So, along with all of this, the message of Srimad Bhagavatam comes the importance of actually living by it as a essential force to help bring people to a life of devotion. And if we don't, it can easily drive people away. Good people drive them away. Because I don't want to be like this. I don't want to be around people like this. So it's not easy to become an exemplary personality. But that's as much our mission as it is like understanding the philosophy and trying to sort it out, and how does time move things, and all those interesting concepts, spiritual intellectual concepts. How to live a life that's consistent. So there we go. That's this morning's discussion. See if there's some topics you like to talk about. Behind you, your sister.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. I was wondering, Maharaj, Kali Yuga is meant to be bad. And suppose the Krishna conscious movement really pervades this age. Is it possible to completely nullify the bad effects of Kali Yuga?
On an individual basis, yes. On a large scale basis, no. Prabhupada would acknowledge that. When Maharaj Parikshit could have killed the personality of Kali, but he didn't, because there's a plan of the Lord. He's the guy for this age. So he didn't kill him. If he killed them, we wouldn't have had this age. But that wasn't the plan of the Lord. So he's doing his thing, and is going to continue to do his thing. But there's respite for those who take shelter. Now, those who take shelter doesn't mean the world around becomes utopia.
Maharaj, I had another question. Are karma and destiny two different things?
Yes. Karma can change, but destiny doesn't change. I should change that. Let me modify that. Destiny is the force of time. One can redirect destiny. Here's becoming a devotee. I became a devotee. So was it a destiny? Was it karma? Because was it just meeting a pure devotee? Was that karma? But so there's a desire, but the destiny. Let's say the spreading of the holy name in every town and village, because that's uttered. That's it's going to happen. And, it didn't happen for a long, long time. Then it started to happen because somebody was carrying that message. But so it's destiny that it will happen. It's not karma. And those people that meet devotees, whether they say yes or no or maybe, it's not karma. There's free will operative. There's some things that are destiny, some things that are karma that are not the same. And there's free will choice.
And Maharaj, since karma can be sort of like nullified by bhakti,
Yeah.
can destiny be...
Well, it can be redirected. Krishna can certainly do a course change.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. So just connecting to her last question. So are suffering due to our own free will, or they are more part of the destiny?
A very simple statement will help. You're responding to your question. The root cause of suffering is ignorance. So now back to your question, destiny or karma. Supposing, something that I've done is bringing a karmic reaction today. Something back there. Now, whether it's suffering, let's supposing, this body's going to die. It's painful. When I don't remember, but it's painful. Scripture says it's painful. The temperature of the body rises, and it's very, very painful. So destiny is there because that which takes birth is certain to die. And dying is suffering, etc. Disease, old age, and birth. So those are inevitable sufferings, even if all other sufferings are overcome. It's destiny, and it can change. One can become deathless, not in this body, but one can become deathless by breaking that cycle of birth and death. So is that karma? Not karma. Is it destiny? It's not exactly destiny. But your question is suffering connected to karma or death? It's connected to what we identify with. And if we identify in ignorance with the temporary, then there's suffering. But that's not predestined. It's a subset of karma, or karma is a subset of our identifying with the temporary, and karma can be broken. Suffering has everything to do with where your consciousness is. And how you're making, and how you or we, each of us, are making free will choices. If consciousness goes to Krishna, then one can pass through situations that are painful on the body or the mind platform and be happy. Internal, the pains of the body and the mind may be there, but internally blissful. Anything else?
So Maharaj, there is very common question, many people ask why good things, why bad things happen with the good people. So is it all because they had wrong free will use, in some past life karmas? Because some people, born with disease, and they are, they haven't, they haven't done anything bad in their whole life, because they only have a preview of what they can see, nothing they can go back in the time.
The two answers are largely yes, because most persons are in ignorance. And so largely it's simply a consequence of misuse of free will sometime in the past. And they're held responsible for the misuse of free will in different ways, but it's misuse of free will in the past. Ignorance is the cause of that misfortune. And there's a second position, and the second position is those who have become karma-free by the strength of bhakti, but there's some residual influence, even for a bhakti practitioner, where ignorance is still influencing consciousness. And then that's a different kind of suffering. Here's an interesting example. It's a little bit conjecture, but there's one devotee, won't mention the name, Prabhupada disciple, who during her childhood she wanted to be a nun. And then she met Hare Krishna devotees and became a Hare Krishna devotee. And she always had this, nuns don't marry, but she had this desire to have a child. In Krishna consciousness movement, after some years of fantastic service, she got married and a child was conceived. But what she shared with me was, shortly after the child was born, the child was put into an incubation chamber because there was some defect. And she came to the incubation chamber where the child was and was able to chant and this and that, but never held the child in her arms, and the child expired. Her understanding was she was given the opportunity to be a mother of a soul that had not completely completed their path of bhakti, and she was being given the service of helping them usher into the final stages of hearing the holy name, even in that small child life. And so they ended up adopting a child. Anyway, that's an anecdotal piece of story where suffering may have something more to do with bhakti that needs to be completed. You find it, look at closely, Sri Brahma Samhita, I forget the verse number. Just Twindra Gopam Atavendra Mahos for Karma, 59 or something like that. Bandhana Rupam Palabhajanam Atanoti, Karmadi Nirtahita Kintu Cha Bhakti Bhajam. Those who engage in devotional service, they may also undergo some difficulty, some misfortune. It is different. You have something. Can we give the microphone?
Maharaj, I had a question relevant to yesterday's class offense.
Yesterday?
Yes.
Okay.
First question is, I feel I feel I'm an offensive person because Vivida's false pride led to offense and then it led to bad association. So I still observe that I have false pride and all the anarthas, and which makes me vulnerable to offend people.
Makes you wonder?
Vulnerable to offend
Vulnerable,
people.
okay.
So is there a hope for offensive person? Like, because I feel like I was away from Krishna consciousness because I have been offensive. That's becoming more and more.
There, you feel there's an obstacle to your making progress because of past offense.
Yeah. Obstacle also, like my current situation. I mean, I was away from Krishna consciousness for so long, so that's because
Your
of offense.
question is there a way to overcome those reactions to past offenses? That's your
Yes,
question.
yes.
In Bhakti Sandarbha, Jiva Goswami answers your question. I can send you the section, but the short answer is Bhakti has it's the consequence of offense is anarthas in the heart, and anarthas in the heart are more difficult to remove, but the Bhakti process has the power to remove them. That's the short. I mean, it's long philosophical Jiva Goswami, explanations, but the short answer is yes. By persisting faithfully in the bhakti process, it has, using Bhakti Siddhanta's language, it has the capacity to efface or remove all obstacles, including the obstacles due to past offense. And there's nothing we can do about the past offense other than gradually get on the other side of the responsibility for that past offense. In Krishna's kindness will carry us.
Thank you, Maharaj. And the last question was like, if I don't mean to offend anybody, like my intentions were not to
Good.
offend,
That's good.
and but still the person is offended. Some devotees are like, who are, because of
It
their
happens.
conditioning.
It happens. Now what
So
to do?
does the consequences of offense apply?
Yes. Yes. But again, if your intention was otherwise and it's perceived as an offense, then it's not not at all the same as the intentional or conscious making of an offense. Deliberate or at least conscious. The weight is far greater over on that side, and the other one is more easily mitigated by the power of bhakti. Krishna's interceding in the heart to remove that. No, what to do because it happens. It happens. We're intending something and it's perceived something else. So your question is there a consequence? Well, we try to make amends if the person lets us know, or we get a sense that they're feeling something. The classic example for your sake, I'm sure you've heard this narration from Bhakti Ratnakar, when Rupa Goswami was smiling and laughing and he was just absorbed in a pastime of Radha and Krishna. And a Brahmin thought that he was laughing at him. So it was easily mitigated. But there was a consequence.
So safer side, it's better to make amends, talk to the person.
Yeah.
With
And supposing, according to Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur in Madhurya Kandamani, supposing the person doesn't say, forgiven, or it was my mistake, not yours, and however, supposing they don't, then you go on with your bhakti and you try again and you go on with your bhakti if they still say no, and you go on with your bhakti if they still say no. And in due course of time, that is diminished and eliminated. Okay. think I'm going to end. Thank you very much. Prabhupada.
Jai.